Our next item held for registered speakers is item B2, consideration of an action on a resolution accepting a draft plan for redistricting of the Houston Independent School District Board of Education single-member trustee districts and confirming public hearings and other matters related thereto. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Dr. Oh, hold on. I guess we'll wait for a second. Would you like to please present Mr. Gene Locke? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President, board members, and to Governor White and Superintendent Reagan and Trustee Davila. I'm here today to talk about the continuing process for the redistricting of the HISD boundaries for the trustee districts. We started this process because of the required annexation. It's okay.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Mr. Locke, we have
it's okay. I think the governor deserves
here.
it. Historic moment. The governor deserves it.
Okay, I think we are back. I apologize for that brief delay. Thank you very much, Mr. Locke.
Yeah. As you trustees are aware, because we've been looking at annexation, looking at the redistricting since the required annexation of the North Forest area, and I'll talk about the population. But we're at a point now in that process where we're about to invite public comment, public participation, the solicitation of ideas and suggestions from the public relating to redistricting. So before you today is a resolution that would acknowledge and accept a draft plan that the lawyers and the consultants have put together that I will show in just a minute, and to authorize public hearings for the public to discuss that draft plan and offer any suggestions or ideas. And that process will unfold for the next month to 6 weeks. And so with your permission, I'd like to go ahead and at least see if I have the... Okay, well, I went too far. Let's back up. Okay. I'd like to talk a little bit about what's about to happen over the next month or so and why it's going to happen. First, as this board started the redistricting process, it was important to give some direction, some guidance, some policy considerations to the lawyers and the demographers who would be bringing you a draft plan. And this board, several months back, adopted priorities and principles for redistricting. And while the board members are familiar with those, if you would allow me, I'd like to go through each one, because I think the public needs to hear the considerations that you took into account as you charged us with the responsibility of getting a draft plan. The first priority was, and is, that the 9 trustee districts should be equal in population. And if there is a deviation in population, it must be no more than 10% top to bottom. So the first thing is equalized population. The second thing is that the trustee district should be contiguous and reasonably compact. The third principle and priority is that the redistricting plan that we come up with, to the extent possible, should be based on the existing trustee composition. And that was an important one because we didn't want to radically change the nature of the way that HISD provides services to its constituents. The fourth one, a traditional redistricting principle, is that wherever possible, we will use identifiable geographic boundaries as our district trustee boundaries. The fifth one, another traditional redistricting principle, To the extent possible, the HISD redistricting plan will seek to maintain communities of interest in a single district and avoid splitting neighborhoods when drawing district lines. The sixth priority and principle, also a traditional redistricting principle, our new plan should use whole county voting precincts whenever possible as we draw the lines. The seventh priority and principle, required by law, is that the new plan must adhere to the Voting Rights Act and avoid retrogression in the position of racial, ethnic, and language minorities with respect to the effective exercise of their right to vote. And the eighth priority and principle, required by the U.S. Constitution, any plan that we come up with should adhere to the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and should not use race as the predominant factor in developing the plan. And then finally, the ninth and last priority and principle, also a traditional recognized redistricting principle, valuing the incumbent constituency relations, the plan should seek to keep existing trustees in their existing districts. So that was kind of the framework from which we began to operate. Now, this is a map that simply shows the way that the HISD districts looked prior to the annexation of North Forest. I ask you to look at that because what we've tried to do is to try to maintain, consistent with one of the priorities and principles I've just mentioned, we've tried to maintain at least this look to the extent possible. This prior, before the annexation of North Forest, the population was relatively equal in each one of the districts, more or less an average of 146,000 people per district. And prior to the annexation, we had racial minorities who had a majority population in some of the districts. For example, in District 1, a Hispanic population majority, in District 3, a Hispanic majority population, and in District 8. And for African Americans in District 2, in District 4, and District 9. Now, once North Forest was annexed, this is the way your map looked. And what it essentially shows is that North Forest was divided between Districts 2 and District 8. Now, just for a moment, consider the impact of the required annexation of North Forest. When the state required HISD to annex North Forest, it brought in 52,000 people into HISD. And state law requires that in single-member districts, everybody has to be in a district. So immediately, when the required annexation became effective by law, and we were forced to take North Forest, we had to assign them to two districts. We assigned them to District 2 and District 8. The reason that was done is because those were the only districts that were contiguous to North Forest. So it was the only opportunity that we could do to assign. However, the annexation of North Forest created a tremendous inequality in the population in the various trustees districts. Before annexation, as I said earlier, the average size of your districts was 145,000 people, more or less, 146,000. After the annexation, the average size should be 151, close to 152,000. And if you look at the impact of this annexation, District 2 was up to 109, almost 200,000 people, and District 8 was over 161,000 people. So top to bottom, we had a population deviation of 25%, way out of the constitutional standard, much more than 10%. So by law, HISD was required to redistrict. It was not a question of whether we wanted to or we thought it was a good idea or a bad idea. We were simply required to do it by law. And I just show some numbers here to show the post population deviation. And for the benefit of the public, I'm going through this slide projection now, but all of this will be available very shortly on the HISD website in full form for the public to consider. These are the post-annexation total population figures for HISD. And what it essentially shows is that now districts 2 and District 8 basically have way too many people, and we have to make some changes. We give you these population figures, both total population and voting age population. And for the record, when your consultants and your lawyers considered redistricting, we looked at 2 population figures, total population and voting age population. Now, here is the proposed draft plan that we would want the trustees to acknowledge and to accept so that the public can comment on. And if you look at the composition of this map, it's hard to go through details on the screen, but we will be able to provide detailed analysis as we go through the public hearings. This map looks remarkably the same to the prior map that was pre-annexation of North Forest and after the annexation of North Forest. And that's because one of our principles was to try, to the extent possible, to try to use the existing boundaries as possible. This is a map of the voting precincts, and we have large maps that were blown up and people can actually see which voting precinct now is in which district. But because there is not significant change, the district boundaries by and large look the same and react the same. And we're also providing a map with this plan of the schools and where the schools fit into each one of the districts with this proposed plan. Now, here is the important thing from a legal standpoint. Remember that our first priority and principle was you've got to equalize population. And remember that the law says you cannot have more than a 10% variance in population from top to bottom. In this plan, we have less than a 10% deviation. We were able to at least come up with a plan that equalizes population throughout the district. And what you see there is, I think it's District 3 that has the smallest number, 146,000 plus, and I think it's District 7 that has the largest, 156,000 plus. So we're within the legally accepted deviation numbers. And then we've given you numbers on total population, and we've given you numbers on voting age population in this new plan. What's important to recognize with the new plan, and now we're talking about voting rights considerations, we took particular care to make sure that there was not a retrogression in the number of protected minorities under the Voting Rights Act. So with this draft plan, at least, where Hispanics had a population majority in terms of voting age population before this plan, it continues here. And with African Americans, the same is true. Where there was a population majority of African Americans in voting age, i.e. 2, 4, and 9, it continues. So we've tried to be very, very particular in making sure that we adhere to the Voting Rights Act. This is a visual that just simply shows what the changes look like with the draft plan as compared to post-annexation. And the red areas indicate the changes. And again, we will have breakdowns of all of these maps as we go through it. But as you can see, looking at big picture, the changes are minimal because we've now basically added 6,000 more people to each of your districts, just kind of on an average. And to do that, we had to swip around. Some of the land mass may be deceiving because some of the areas may look very large and there are very few people. So you can't look just at the land mass. You have to look at the concentration of people to see where we are. And here's why we think at least this draft plan deserves consideration by the public, and we would ask that this board accept it for purposes of allowing it to go out for public discussion. Obviously, during the public discussion process, if there are comments and suggestions or ideas that are consistent with the priorities and principles and this board wants to adopt, this draft plan can be amended. It is not intended to be the final product, and you're not being asked today to vote on a final product. You're simply being asked today to begin the process. But here are the reasons why we think this draft plan at least satisfies the priorities and principles and the voting rights laws. First of all, in terms of population deviation, this plan has a 6.4% deviation top to bottom, which is a very good number. Number two, the compactness and continuity and the compactness, the draft plan is consistent with the current plan, and we tried to do this with minimal changes. Number three, most of the people who are in a district now will stay in that district. The greatest amount of changes in one district where 86% of the people remain in that district. The least amount of change is in a district where 97% stay in the same area. This plan also uses major roads, waterways, and geographic boundaries as district boundaries whenever possible. Now, recognizing that Houston is home to a multitude of communities of interest and neighborhoods, the draft plan maintains as many recognizable communities and neighborhoods together as possible while still trying to balance the 8 priorities and principles and achieve the necessary population equalization. And we're quite proud of the fact that this plan improves on the number of split voting precincts. Previously, under the old plan, there were 46 voting precincts that were split. Now, under this plan, there are only 5. That really eliminates a lot of voter confusion when people come to vote for HISD trustees, which we think is a good thing. And as I've said earlier, we maintain an African American voting age majority population in districts 2, 4, and 9, and maintain an Hispanic voting age population in districts 1, 3, and 8. And this draft plan took a number of things under consideration, but race was not the predominant consideration in drafting this plan. And finally, the plan does keep all the incumbent trustees in their existing districts. So if you accept this as a draft plan, the next step would be to have public hearings. Our proposal is to have 4 public hearings, and at those public hearings, invite the public to come and offer as much comment as possible. The 4 proposed locations for public hearings would be as follows. Shady Dale Elementary School, which is in the North Forest area, on July 1 at 6:30. Then on July 8th at 6:30, the Pin Oak Middle School. And then on July 10 at this location, in this auditorium, at 6:30. And then the final hearing at Austin High School on July 15 at 6:30. So all hearings at 6:30, and the hearings are across the city. After all of the public hearings, the lawyers and the demographers will gather the public comments, make a report to this board, and we will then be about the business considering, is it possible to develop a final plan. So with those considerations, if there are questions to me, I'm happy to entertain that. If not, I would urge this board to accept and pass the resolution that acknowledges the draft plan and allows us to go forward with public hearings.
Thank you, Mr. Locke. Are there any questions or discussion from my colleagues? Seeing none, please vote. The motion passes 8-4, 0 against, with 1 absent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.